Wow, when I sat down there was nobody here, so things happen behind your back, obviously. Thank you very much for the attendance. The speaker that was supposed to be here is, like already said, under medical supervision, and I was asked to jump in. The original speech I was going to give had in front of it the topic of GDPR, which I gave earlier downstairs. I don't know who attended. Now we're coming to the second part, which is the past, present, and future of cybercrime, cyberterrorism, and cyber warfare. A little bit of background about myself. I started security when I got my first computer. Essentially, it was called different back then. Then, because there was nothing really to do in terms of computers that was of interest to me, I did a short excursion into the German financial sector and went into the insurance business. I then specialized in corporate and industrial risks later on, and then essentially moved back to what I was passionate about, which is the web in so many of its ways that are out there. I started out then in digital strategy and did a lot of work for some quiet or numerous prestigious customers. And upon the Lolita City hack, my interest in terms of security, mainly in context to the deep web and Bitcoin, started to resurface in 2011, and since then I've kind of played on with that, and yeah, that's what we're going to be speaking about today. Now, in real life, criminals have several major problems. Think of the fact, or if you have enough criminal energy to think about that you want to kidnap somebody, you have two major obstacles. The obstacle number one is delivering your ransom note in a way that you don't have to give up your identity. And number two is, how are you going to accept the ransom? Now, there are two things that come in awfully handy here. That's number one, the deep web with or Tor mail and all of the mail services that are out there, and number two, Bitcoin, of course, as a means of transacting the loot, if you wanted. So these things are. I started publishing about them in 2011. I think was the first publication I did on it, which I took then to police services and intelligence services and government organizations, who all looked down on me and said, "Hey, look, that's so obscure. It's not going to happen." A few years later, I was at a meeting with an insurance company, and there was a guy there who works for a crisis intervention company. I don't know who's aware, but insurers also underwrite the kidnapping and ransom risks, and obviously it's not your insurance salesman that does the negotiation with the kidnapper. It's specialized companies that try to reduce the requested ransom and basically take over the entire process. So this guy, after the presentation I had given, walks up to me and says, "Hey, this Bitcoin thing, is that real? Like, is it like traceable?" And I'm like, "No, that's the purpose of Bitcoin." Upon which he opened up that they actually had the first kidnappings where the ransom wasn't requested in monetary assets, euros, dollars, or yen, or whatever, or diamonds, which is a more exotic request to make, but they had actually had requests for Bitcoin upon which they had, or which the kidnappers had wanted as an exchange, as a ransom for the people they kidnapped. And these are, of course, as I said, there are several major problems. These are two core ones: is anonymous communication and anonymous asset transfer, which is increasingly important to and makes it easier for criminals to use these instruments to do their thing. Now, true or false, deep web and Bitcoin equals crime. That is obviously false, because both Tor and Bitcoin have had totally different intentions. The Tor network being a means of anonymous communication, which originally, I'm sure everybody is aware, was developed by the US Navy to allow their agents to communicate in hostile environments anonymously and to use the web anonymously. And Bitcoin obviously was more of an anarchist revolution kind of thing to show that the world or that monetary assets can work without central banks being in the background or other institutions that interfere, like the SWIFT network, for instance. So I would say false. Yes, it's definitely an enabler, but it's always a two-sided, two-bladed sword, basically, that you can use a knife to cut butter or cut somebody's throat. So essentially, this is not true by itself. So what's going on the deep web? Can I have a raised hands of people who are aware of what's going on there criminally? Seriously, because then I'll cut a little bit short. Okay, I see a half hand. So we have a lot of criminal activity going on there. We have a lot of propaganda going on that the communication or that the usage of particularly the Tor network is in itself fallible, and you always get references to Silk Road, for instance, and you get references to the youngest alphabet and so on and so forth. The problem with that is if you look at the criminal records, which were done both for Ross Ulbricht and the other guy's name I forgot, who supposedly hanged himself in a Thailand jail cell, is that their OPSEC just screwed up, which means, in turn, that if you do things right, and if you avoid these mistakes, which are clearly in popular opinion, then you can actually use the Tor network, and if you want to transact Bitcoin for criminal purposes, also you can use them in such a way that they are very well anonymous, contrary to popular opinion. What we have going on is assassinations. I don't know if anybody has a neighbor or a spouse they want to get rid of that will do well, and the case of Ross Ulbricht has proven that these services offered actually work out as well. We have drug trafficking, which is a major problem, which is, again, the Alpha Bay market and the Silk Road marketplaces, which were seized. However, there are still a large variety of them operational. The problem is with Silk Road, the guy, whoever did it, it was supposedly this Mr. Ulbricht, but it's never been really proven. If you look at the court documents, he had a mission, and he wanted to basically prove in an anarchistic way that it is possible to exchange goods anonymously, and that he wanted to create kind of like a utopia marketplace rather than being only in it for the drugs and the money and so on and so forth, which can be proven by the manifesto that was published on the website when it was still online, where it was distinctly said that, for instance, no assassinations, etc., should be offered there. This vacuum, which was created by Silk Road, was very quickly filled by a spin-off, and very briefly after that by a variety of other marketplaces. Alpha Bay and Hansenet, I think, was the other one, or Hanse was the other one called, which basically took its place. Much less scrupulous. Everything went there, from software or malware or whatever illegal software you wanted to purchase there. That was possible, and this is true for the marketplaces that have filled the vacuum that has now been created by Alpha Bay and Hanse. And this is, for law enforcement, a very big problem, because operationally these guys are quite clever, so a lot of them will offer their contraband nationally, meaning that they only need to put it in the national mail, which is very seldomly checked by customs, if at all. And that by itself presents a major problem. The contraband will be smuggled from one country to another and there distributed by post. So there's a big logistic operation going on behind that. It's not some kind of French fry shop that that we're looking at. Exchange of data and malware, rent-a-hacker, and so on and so forth are obviously known to everyone. The malware part has been taken into the shelves of pretty much every marketplace that you have out there today. So that in itself presents a major problem. Also, exchange of guidelines for very interesting hacks, for instance, one being that documents are stolen not by means of penetrating a server or a network, but something very stupid. You build the scanning part of your document scanner into what's it called? Thing you put the paper in and it shreds. Paper shredder, thank you. You build a scanner into there, so every document essentially that goes into the bin and gets shredded will be scanned, and you have no RF signals or anything going out of the building, simply because there's a small USB key in there which the cleaning lady will then once a week take out and replace for a new one. So whenever you're sitting there like I did back when I was working on that case, if you're ever sitting there pulling out your hair on an incident where you don't know how documents are being stolen from a company, look at the paper shredder. It's a good clue in terms of getting things out. Human trafficking, I already mentioned it, was the part that got me back interested in security. Was Lolita City, which is one of the most devious and disgusting child porn portals out there. It was taken down by Anonymous in 2011, and large parts of the data was extracted during that process. Some of the data was leaked to law enforcement agencies, and a large variety of them weren't able to handle the data or know what to do with it because they just didn't know what Tor was and what was possible there. And this has changed, obviously, but still it's a shot in the dark that a lot of the law enforcement agencies are actually pulling off right now. For instance, we had one case recently in Germany where there was product extortion against, of all goods, Nutella, where a retiree wanted to increase his, or wanted to up his pension a little bit. This was in Dortmund. And the guy said that he had poisoned several glasses of Nutella and reintroduced them into the supply chain. The only screw up he did, and he requested Bitcoin for ransom. This was new. The only screw up he did was that he used his conventional email to convey his ransom demands. So that doesn't work out. Weapons proliferation. This was very recent, 1 or 2 years ago in Germany, where we had an assailant in Munich who supposedly purchased the guns he used through the deep web. And this is by far not the only case. For instance, in the Benelux states, the police are, or have been for years, trying to get hold of a guy that is just selling heavy arms, and they just can't prove anything. They know it's him. They know there's surveillance going on with him, but they just can't pin it to him. So these are actual examples of things that are currently going on. Illegal pornography, I already stated it, is the thing that is a very definite problem. Kidnapping and ransom, I also mentioned it earlier, is becoming more and more popular upon kidnappers. This does not only refer to physical kidnappings, but in turn also for the entire epidemic of ransomware that we've been experiencing in the past 2 or 3 years. So to put a line under it, crime is getting easier, or is it? Because if these factors are taken away, which or if this is the head start that criminals have against law enforcement, it's a pretty creepy situation with all of this stuff going on there. And that being said, it's a proof of concept, a model of success, because the motive is there, definitely, to get rich quick, And that's why I went so deeply into these instruments to give you a quick update on what's going on there. Now, ransomware 2016, just because this is another topic that I just mentioned, we had 60% of enterprises hit, which is a very interesting number. 63% of those were down more than 1 day, which means that operations have halted, which in turn means that a lot of money is being wasted due to the fact that by means of social engineering or copying an email address book and sending a ransomware-ridden email to the people in the address book actually happens. I've worked several cases where we went into into the forensics and actually tried to find out where it came from and worked together with district attorneys and so on and so forth. The emails that were, or the links in the email that were clicked on, they didn't have content. It was a garbled up link, really, where no one should actually click on, but due to the fact that it came from, or supposedly came from, an institution or friend of mine, a large variety of people actually clicked on the link, and this is happening more and more, despite the fact that education and trainings are being done, despite the fact that hardware is being implemented. I think we will see this arms race go on for quite some time. An interesting number to mention is that over $1 billion were paid in ransom in 2016, which brings us to the next very interesting method of CEO fraud, a form of social engineering, in which over $3.5 billion in losses were to be accounted, with 1,300% increase in cases, as the FBI states, leading to, and this is the most interesting thing, multiple bankruptcies. And the cases are becoming increasingly complex, meaning that I worked on one case where it wasn't just an email that went from the supposed CEO to the CFO telling him to issue a wire, but this case was actually relied upon intelligence gathering, which went on for months, and it was only exploited when the CEO actually flew to another country to conduct a deal which was worth in and around 12 to 15 million euros. The crooks hired a guy that had a similar voice to that of the CEO, called the CFO relatively late in the night with a spoofed phone number of the hotel the CEO was staying at, and via voice telling him to issue the wire. The wire was issued, the CEO comes home and says, hey, look, you know, or the CFO goes up to the CEO and says, great job, and the CEO goes, what, the deal went down the drain, it didn't happen. The 15 million, obviously, that were wired were gone. And this is just one of the things where we see an increase in complexity, and that is, an arms race, as I said earlier. Overall, we have, or the losses due to cybercrime are expected to supersede $6 trillion, that's trillion with a T. A lot of countries don't have that as their GDP. And that's by 2022. We're now at estimated $3.2, $3.5 trillion, which are lost every year due to these facts. And it's an interesting figure that's being displayed here. Can we do anything about it? I would dare to say no, because with the methods and means available to the crooks, it will always be a game in which somebody will lose. Now, as for the CEO fraud, I've created a training program, which I have successfully implemented with one client who insisted, who was also frauded. That was only something around 52,000 euros, I think, but still. Upon training his staff, I created really an elaborate training program to specifically manage or mitigate the risk of such risks. As I mentioned, cybercrime is kind of before my slides. Cybercrime is becoming increasingly complex. We have increasingly complex malware that's out there, and the exploits that are being used are becoming more and more creative also. And so, yeah, there's lots to do. Let's get it on. One interesting topic I wanted to mention specifically was cyberterrorism. In 2014, I published an article in a world-leading publication about counterterrorism, which was mainly geared towards ISIS having available over $2 billion in their war chest, and that it would be likely and could be easy for them to orchestrate a large-scale cyber attack, which would then disable the internet for the Western world, because we are becoming more and more technology reliant. The article was frowned upon. I was invited to send it to the German Parliament, and the one response I got was, "Hey, Mr. Hilse, don't you worry, we're going to make a law against this. So, you know, sleep well." Showing that this topic is being underwritten as well. Shortly after my article was published, the attacks on TV Saint Monde happened in France, where the perpetrators managed to take down 11 satellite stations and take hold of their entire social media, and so on and so forth. It went through the media quite publicly. The problem with cyber warfare and cyber terrorism and the enterprise is one very huge problem. The term of cyber warfare or cyber terrorism and what that is has not been defined, meaning that you can take out a cyber insurance policy today, and in the terms and conditions it says nebulously or war-like scenario. And since this has not been defined, if ever is found out that one of these ransomware attacks is actually state-sponsored, the insurance companies will come back to you and say, "Nah, we're not going to pay. This was a warlike act." And until such a time that these terms have not been described or have been annotated with a definition, it is very well a huge problem for the enterprise sector, because this is essentially a go-out-of-jail card, not only for the insurance companies, but also for software vendors and providers and so on and so forth, who also like to have in their terms and conditions that these kind of exploits are not to be not covered. Your questions, please.
Yes. You can raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Okay. So you have your phone number here, so you can, text if somebody still does that instead of only social media, etc. But Lars, honestly, you draw a rather disturbing picture, and that's quite fine. We have to face the reality, and every time we hear mentions of, children kidnapping, it's rather disturbing. And we don't get like television or traditional media talking about that too much. And so in terms of, one of your slides had this caption, which is crime is becoming more easy, like doing crime is becoming more easy.
Yes.
And probably deep web is one of the reasons why, simply because the tools are, more or less available. Now, in regards of deep web, how easy it is to go acquire something, do something, or it's mostly used by professionals and amateurs don't go there and don't try these things?
My experience is that amateurs very well go there, and in the paper particularly about kidnapping and ransom, in context to these two enablers, deep web and Bitcoin, so amateurs go there. This means that the kidnappings that were orchestrated were not done by tech-savvy people, nor was the kidnapping or the product extortion, the Nutella product extortion in Dortmund, done by a professional. This was a novice. Very clearly so, because he was an idiot and used his normal email to send his ransom demand. Meaning that it's gotten hold in the Tor and deep web have gotten hold into
into the living room, and that's really the scary part about it. It's not that the instruments are out there, because the instruments have been used for good in a large variety of cases. Think of the Arab Spring and so on and so forth, where these were the only means of communication that were left over after the regimes kind of shut down the web in large parts. And so, it's like I said, you can use a knife to cut a piece of butter or an apple, or you can use it to cut somebody's throat. So therefore, we have to be very careful in terms of, even thinking about outlawing such an instrument, because I think the good overweighs clearly. However, these just stated slides have to be mentioned. This problem cannot be ignored, because there's a lot of money being made, and the financial damages are critical. I don't know what Latvia's GDP is, but I think it's below 6 trillion. And so therefore, there's a lot to be done, and I think mainly it's awareness that can be raised. Some risks that I mentioned can be mitigated, like the CEO fraud training program I created, to at least reduce the risk. You can't eliminate it entirely, but it can be reduced.
There has to be some standards within the organization.
Precisely, yeah. So you have your standards of, 4 eyes only can execute a wire, or, these are all methodologies that are put in place to then mitigate the risk. However, again, mentioning that these things are real, they're well researched, and like I said, against popular opinion, they are very, very safe.
Okay. Now, the last thing I have to do is, here I have a nice certificate and a nice little present for you as a thank you note from the organizers of the conference. Okay, now applause. So, here's to you. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you.